Right, so this talk is called Development of Einsteinian Physics from Newtonian Physics. I have been researching this issue of how Einstein developed his relativity theories, special and general, given the basis of his day, which was around 1905, was Newtonian physics, and I've come across many problems. So this is Einstein's first paper on special relativity, and he gives no references. So straight away have the problem of what he's working from, and he does seem to be working from the common knowledge of physics of his day. One of the books he went by was this one. It's called The Grammar of Science by Carl Pearson, and it gives a general background to the physics of his day. One of what may be the surprising things to many physics students was that there was a unified theory of physics before Einstein. It's a topic that is consigned to the History of Physics department instead of the Physics Education department. For instance, this historian of physics/science deals with it, and calls it a Victorian theory of everything. So it's an attempt to form a unified theory of physics before Einstein. Work was being carried out on this unified theory of physics, but with the changes Einstein made, that work got abandoned. It was then dropped from what was taught to physics undergraduates, left to the History of Physics department. And that is a shame, because not really teaching how the theorizing of Einstein would have developed from him working from a basis of earlier work on unified theory. Most important of these earlier workers on unified theory was this person, Boscovich, from the 18th century. And the Encyclopedia of Philosophy explains, Boscovich's atomic theory arose, as he himself stated, from an attempt to build a comprehensive physics based on the ideas of Newton and Leibniz, but going beyond both to obtain new results. So basically, Boscovich was working on Newtonian physics, taking it further from where Newton left it. So it's not properly documented how the work before Einstein led up to Einstein's work as to what changes he made. Also, it's not properly documented the work on Einstein's work by others that came after him as to the changes made by these others, i.e. there are a lot of problems. But picking up on just one, the mathematics connecting Newton to Einstein, it would be by a correspondence principle. So what the correspondence principle is explained here. Correspondence principle is used in a more general sense to mean the reduction of a new scientific theory to an earlier scientific theory in appropriate circumstances. And in this case, it would be the reduction of Einstein's relativity to Newtonian physics under appropriate circumstances. There is a correspondence principle for quantum mechanics, reducing to classical physics. And Wikipedia explains, Einstein's special relativity satisfies the correspondence principle because it reduces to classical mechanics in the limit of velocity small compared to the speed of light. So picking up on just the first myth of special relativity from this paper, it's by Rolf, and it says, says misconceptions about relativity theory are common and pernicious. I address two such misconceptions, and I'm going to deal with the first misconception he's dealing with. And in my view, there are many myths of special relativity, but don't have time to deal with them all. Myth in the context of what is taught to physics students about relativity is wrong. So this is what Ralph says. Question: does the Lorentz transformation reduce to Galilean transformation when the ratio v divided by c is small? And the answer is no. The problem is with time. The Lorentz transformation has this equation, while the Galilean transformation of time is t prime equals t. And I'm just going to assume you know what these equations are, and you should know if you're familiar with relativity. So, starting with the Lorentz transformation equation for time, for low speed, the relativistic gamma factor approximately equals 1. And so then t prime approximately equals t minus vx divided by c squared. And the trick being used was to think as v tends to 0, then vx divided by c squared tends to 0. But that is not what happens, because as v tends to 0 can make x, or the x divided by c squared term, arbitrarily large. So the correspondence principle as taught to physics students, which is supposed to be between Newton and Einstein, is a myth. So this is an example is what is said about special relativity in the text, and at the bottom of the page 11 it says an inspection of equations 1.4.1, which is the Lorentz transformation above, show that in a situation where v much less than c, the transformation reduces to the Galilean one, and that is false, as I already explained. So you might say it is being fussy to point out that this is wrong in these texts, but all or most of these texts seem to have gone with repeating this mathematically false claim, and mathematics should be accurate, not some mess taught to physics students. I don't know the origin of this false claim, but it does not seem to be Einstein. Someone after him made the false claim, and then all the other texts copied it. What Einstein says is nothing like it. Has something completely different for the correspondence principle. First of all, I have to point out Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity has been mistranslated from German into English. In Einstein's paper on special relativity 1905, he assumed light speed in vacuum for inertial frame structure was constant, and based on that mathematics was supposed to be done in a certain way. Unfortunately, the German word none got confused with the German word nur, and so it got mistranslated. And this is the reference for where it's pointed out. It says a mistranslation of a passage in Einstein's original paper on relativity. This is the mistranslated German passage. This is the mistranslation, and in the square brackets that's where the mistranslation is occurring. So the correct translation is the latter time can now be defined in establishing by definition that the time, and then so forth. The difference is, in the correctly translated passage, Einstein allows maths to be done in a different way to what he's doing it, if you want to. This then applied to the light triangle. So this is what is normally shown in the thought experiment. You consider a person in a box that can move, light bouncing up and down, and if that box is moving relative to the person outside, which is Bob, what Bob sees is light moving in this triangular path. So doing the maths for that, you form this right angle triangle. The distance along the hypotenuse is c delta t. Delta t is the time interval. Object moves velocity v along the adjacent side, and that distance is v delta t. While the opposite, let us call the distance c prime delta t primed, for reasons to become clear anon. Then by Pythagoras, you can form this equation of c delta t all squared equals v delta t all squared plus c prime delta t prime all squared. And so now let's drop the use of the delta, not really necessary, so long as you remember dealing with time intervals. Then this becomes ct all squared equals vt all squared plus c prime t prime all squared. Rearranging, we can eventually then form these equations, and if we make c prime is equal to c, then this equation reduces to ct prime all squared equals ct all squared minus vt all squared. And rearranging, we can then form the time dilation equation. However, being allowed to do math a different way, so could have done form this equation, which is c prime t prime all squared equals ct all squared minus vt all squared. Could have instead substituted into there t prime is equal to t and c doesn't equal to c prime, instead of the other condition, which was c prime equal to c and t prime doesn't equal to t. And that is the correspondence of Einstein with Newton. Einstein's maths has the equation 2, and Newton would usually be understood as having variable speed of light, which is equation 1. Thus the correspondence principle has been done wrong, and relativity built on mistakes such as this one illustrated. The failure of the correspondence, i.e. the version taught to physics students, highlights Einstein's relativity has not been properly understood. Conclusion. What it amounts to is myths are being taught to physics students about relativity. Einstein didn't properly clarify these things sufficiently. When it gets to the issue of trying to fix these mistakes, which are myths, of course that raises a great deal of disagreement of how to do that with people that I have talked to. And so thank you, that's the end of this talk, highlighting my researches on Einstein's relativity and its connection to Newton. Thank you, the end.